Welcome to the How We Get Through podcast, where we share stories, mental health insights, and healing advice on life's everyday challenges. I'm your host, Jen, and today's guest is Leslie Slemmons, a licensed social worker from South Carolina. In this episode, we'll be exploring the myth that thought-stopping or controlling our thoughts is the only way to manage anxiety. Leslie will share her personal and clinical experience in managing anxiety and how moms can find kindness and connection in the midst of chaos. Join us as we rewrite the narrative around mom anxiety to find a better way of getting through. Today's guest is Leslie Slemmons, who's a licensed clinical social worker with 15 years of experience. She also is a 200-hour yoga-trained teacher and is certified in Level 1 of Internal Family Systems. Leslie's private practice is located in South Carolina, where she helps women get through anxiety, body image, all things motherhood, and intergenerational trauma. She's also a mom of 4 and is a Filipino-American who is passionate about creating access to care for those who are marginalized. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so good. So we like to start every show off with a mental health myth, and we would love to know yours.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot. So
Yes.
I was having difficulty settling on figuring out which one. And I think the one that comes to my mind, particularly just with the topic that I'm really passionate about, obviously, is anxiety. And so I think there's a myth there that thought stopping or like controlling your thoughts is the only way to manage anxiety. So that's my myth.
Dang, girl, start it off. Break it open. So this is hard. It might be hard for some people to hear because I think it's been so forward about like, this is how you deal with anxiety. And I would love to know your thoughts. Like, did you ever believe that or start teaching that? And was there kind of a switch for you? Or how did you come to this idea that we can't just like stop anxiety like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Very much like personally, but then, clinically, my experience too. I was originally trained very behaviorally. And, that like behavior can and should be managed, and that people lack the tools. So if you give them the skills, then they can use these skills and it'll make them feel better. And, especially as a therapist, that gave me a sense of power in knowing that like I had these skills and I could give this to a person and help them. And so, I think that's why I was originally first drawn to the behavioral kind of ways of helping clients. And, I tried it for many years and it never lasted. Like sometimes it would work, so I don't want to totally say like it's not relevant because I can see how, especially in the beginning, it's really appealing because it's so concrete, right? And
yes,
it can sometimes, it can work, but it didn't last. And so, after just realizing this isn't working, I had to kind of look what else was out there and find some other strategies that could be helpful. So, yeah, but then I found even now, like that is the first thing that people think, like, oh, if you as a therapist can just tell me what I need to do, particularly with my mind, like, then I will feel better and this will go away. And, I think that sometimes can be a little bit heartbreaking as a client when you have to realize like, oh gosh, it's not as easy as I wished it was. And
but I get that a lot, right? Like, I just need the tools. Give me the tools. Tool. Like, and it's always like, yes, we'll kind of do some tools, but there's so much more inner work around that, or exploration, or accepting things that is part of the tool. So not necessarily like an external thing, but this internal compass, right?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing that I found interesting, and again, this isn't for everyone, but I have seen this as a theme, is that sometimes anxiety can really bring us back, especially if it's older clients, to like when we were kids and we felt that way. And often, and again, with good intention, parents and teachers manage anxiety really well. And so they typically do use more of that kind of like thought stopping or thought controlling way of just trying to help in the moment. And so I also think that's why that feels more relatable, because when we're younger, that tends to be a strategy that is often used. So it sounds and it feels familiar.
Yeah.
Um, and, again, it goes back to like it doesn't last, unfortunately. And that's why often as people get older and they still have difficulties with their anxiety,
Yeah.
they need to try something different or new.
I love that because it is like a very behavioral based, like at school is like, what's the behavior? Is it bad behavior? Is it good behavior? Let's manage the behavior, not necessarily the emotional like undertone. And honestly, like teachers, hats off, man. They got a lot going on. They are the best people in the world. So it's not up to them to manage it, but it's just talking about like the system around, like we focus as a society, we focus a lot on behavior versus like the emotional undercurrent with it all. Yeah. And so, Leslie, like, how did you get in this field? Like, what was your path here? Even with the yoga teacher training, like, where did you find yourself drawn to this profession?
Yeah, I really like have found that social work has felt more like a calling than it has like me, just finding this profession. It's almost been this like whisper of like just drawing me into. And so for me, I can always remember as a kid knowing that in some capacity I wanted to help people. That just always felt really true for me. And then when I turned 18, which is crazy to know that that was like 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
But when I was 18, everyone was applying for college, and I just felt like I was not ready for that step. And so I didn't go to college my first semester, and I went to the Philippines and stayed there for a few months and worked at an orphanage. And
Wow.
um, I was first interested in shadowing. They had a pediatrician that lived there. And then I found myself like always going to the social workers. Like, I
Oh,
mean, the pediatrician was really cool, but the social workers were like in it, they were
yeah.
just like, and everybody like really respected them, and they
Ugh.
were like in the orphanage, but then they were like out. And so that's kind of what started me. And I was like, hey, this seems like a really, I don't know, I just really respected and felt like they were doing something amazing. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think from that, then I just, my undergrad and grad school are both kind of stayed within the social work realm, and particularly in like that international social work is what my master's is in. So I've always been really drawn towards that systems idea. Um, and then, yeah, I feel like my 20s were like just totally putting myself out there and working with
Uh-huh.
different populations of needs. So I kind of started in more of like the foster care residential setting,
Uh-huh.
and then moved into some community organizing. So I was like knocking on people's doors and seeing how they
Yeah.
wanted to change their community, and then I
Oh,
switched over to um, back more in a clinical realm, but I was a director for a school that specialized in kids and autism. So,
uh,
in that role and capacity, it was definitely more working with other schools and administrators and families. And then we moved here so that was all in Illinois. And then we moved here to South Carolina. And that is where I opened up my own private practice. So I've been doing that for almost 5 years, and went back, I feel like back to school, but in a different way, and got trained in yoga and internal family system.
yes. Yes. I feel like, a therapist training is like never done. Like there's always, I think, especially in like pop culture, like there's newer things or newer modalities that get really popular. And so, I mean, we obviously have to like keep up our certifications for our license. But it is, I think, that kind of fun part about the field is like you can kind of always be changing or always be growing or learning new things or learning how to help people in a different realm. Like even to you talking about like your behavioral moving into like the somatic stuff or internal family system stuff, like we are allowed to evolve. And I think as society evolves too, and their needs and people saying like, I think they're just more aware of other ways to heal.
Yeah. Optimal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's been so exciting about this profession is that there's that opportunity to grow and to kind of move as you personally develop, and what brings you meaning. You'll often attract those clients that also are looking for that meaning.
Yeah.
And so I think I've just been so in love with what I do because it's like been so personal in how I've gotten to, just like you said, evolve and move with it. Which is, it's exciting to know that, it can change as we need to.
Yes, exactly. And naturally, you're a mom, I'm a mom. And when we first met, oh man, whenever I would tear up every time I would meet with you. I'd be like, Leslie, like I'm not even in a session with you, but you just have this beautiful way of holding space. And like, I don't know, you're just like a giant hug where you're like, cry, girl, cry. And you're not saying you're not saying that to me, but that's what I feel around you is just like, oh, yes. And I think you just create like such like a groundedness, and this is like for sure in your course as well. But I think that's how we kind of came up with this idea around mom anxiety, right? And kind of flipping the idea of how anxiety can show up for us, but also naming really traditionally what it looks like. And so I would love for you to kind of talk about like how mom anxiety is showing up today for us moms, so we can kind of like, oh, that happens to me, and recognize it as it's coming up for us.
Yeah, right. So, one, I think it's important to just name, like, we live in a world where, like, who doesn't have some form of anxiety, right? That, like, like all of our nervous systems are like just amped up because of the way our world is moving at such a quick pace that I really believe that our psyche and our emotional well-being is not meant to live in this type of like constant movement, constant going, constant rush of life. And so I think overall, probably most people can relate to some form of anxiety. However, I think mothers experience a very unique kind of nuance of anxiety in it looks different, I think, in different stages of motherhood. However, there's such a commonality, particularly in how our world is now, that I think makes being a mother so incredibly challenging. And when we were talking through a course, it was like, I had just had my baby a few months.
Yes.
And so, I was like, wow, and I still am in this postpartum, like, what is happening to my body?
Baby.
And
yes.
Yeah. So it just felt really alive and real for me. And I thought it would be such a great way to just use what I was experiencing as a way to connect and not only just support other moms that are there, but to let you know, like, I'm here with you, and that like this is really hard. Like, this stuff is real, and really, like, it shouldn't be ignored. It should be well loved. And that was my hope, like, when I was thinking of the course, like, how can we just really love mothers well, particularly when they are experiencing something that can be so distressing and uncomfortable.
Yes. And you do a beautiful job. You even like walk us through an exercise, like a grounding exercise, and like just even your tone throughout the course is, again, so grounding. There's something about you and your voice and your cadence that is just so, grounding. Like, you just create such a beautiful space. And so for you to even be in that space and create a course says a lot about you and even I think our journeys as mothers, and even like having your fourth baby, right? And it's like, I'm going to make time for this because this is important to me. And I think we tend to kind of put ourselves on the back burner, right? Of, oh, well, I'm experiencing this, but I have to do all these other things, right? And so I'm wondering if that's part of like how the anxiety shows up, is that we don't really acknowledge that it's there or take time for us to settle with it or acknowledge it. What do you think?
Yeah, right. And how difficult it is when we live in a culture that doesn't give moms space to do that, right?
Say that
So,
again.
like that is to me one of the root causes of the difficulty is that we have a culture that has perpetually expected women to show up as men, right? And so we don't give any time off. We don't give any support in pregnancy. We don't really have any postpartum care. There's a lack of village for women to really feel that they can have other people to lean on. And so, I hate to say it, but like we left, we really have failed in raising kids well because we are not raising and supporting others well. And to me, like, I think that is why it's not mom's unwillingness to support themselves. It's that we don't have that structure in place. And so like moms are just drowning, right? And then they're expected to not be drowning, which is like shame, right? Like what's happening? I shouldn't be drowning. I should be this super mom who has my shit together. Let me look on Instagram and compare myself. So it's like this awful cycle that is so difficult to really feel like moms can show up not only as they want to, but as like their most authentic self.
Wow. That's so powerful. And I think I knew that, but you saying that is like, I don't know, just gives you time to kind of sit in that and marinate in that of how that was for me is what I'm thinking about in my experience of like, we just kind of have to pick up and go. And even I think being a therapist, you're like, well, that's not going to happen to me because I know, or I've like experienced it, or I will know when something's wrong. And I think that was there to a certain extent. But the idea that we don't give mom space, we're not built in society to give mom space to rest or to acknowledge these things. And it's not to blame them because we do, that is it. Why am I like this? There's something wrong with me, right? If I'm not moving through this quick enough, or if there's anxiety coming up, or if there's depression coming up, or if I'm not happy, or if I'm yelling at my kids, like there must be something wrong with me.
Totally. Wow. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I think that that's what's so difficult about, moving into what we feel is no, because, it can bring up a lot of stuff that, we really, as moms, like you have to survive, right? You're taking care, you're responsible of so much. And that's kind of been my reflection on my fourth kid. Like, it's really not supposed to be this way. Like I find myself like, there's so many things I love about it. And there's so many things that are challenging about it. And I really have embraced that the challenges, it's really not supposed to be this way. Yeah. Because we're not meant to do it alone.
Yeah.
And that's a myth, right? That's a myth.
Yes. Right, exactly. And I even think so the society doesn't give us space. It's not built to support us in the way that we need to. And I think there's like, we're just kind of hit with a lot of things that we're not maybe, and consent might be the wrong word, but like consenting to. Like if we're on social media or TikTok or something, like you're scrolling through so many different things that you don't know what the next video can be. And I remember just recently I saw this mom in Target and she had like a clip on her daughter's hand, like almost like those backpacks, when the kids run away. It was like that, but she was in the cart. She had it clipped on her daughter's hand and then clipped on her hand. And the whole thing was like, my child's not going to get stolen in Target. And I'm like, what? Like, that's a thing that is going to happen to me? You know, like, it was just, I think that societal pressure of like, you're hit with almost all the worst case scenarios. And some of these worst case scenarios happen, obviously, with schools and stuff like that. And so there is a lot in our world, I think, to be anxious about. And also, again, that barrier where we're not actively choosing to or knowing that we're going to step into something that is going to cause us anxiety.
It is. It is abrupt, right? And then your system is absorbing that. And so, like, because we're not isolated, right? We're social beings. And so even if, right, because then could be the strategy of like, well, then I'm just going to not go on social media. I'm just not going to watch the news. But unfortunately, like, you don't live in a bubble. And so even if maybe you're not confronted in the same way, like it exists. And then to me, I've been like, but I like want to live my life, like I don't want to like not be surrounded by other people who may bring these things up because it's out there in the world. Yep. And I think that, kind of moves me into like how yoga has felt really powerful, particularly I think in lineage that I've been taught with Jessica Char, is like yoga is not meant to remove us. We're not, like you don't have to be a monk to have a practice. Like yoga is about like living your life in your fullest capacity and not taking away from your life. And that to me has felt so powerful in motherhood, is like, oh, I can like lean into this. Like, yeah, this is difficult, but I can find a way to like move into it rather than trying to remove myself from it.
I love that. I love that. And it just feels like that embodiment of taking care of yourself. So when it feels overwhelming, like lean into that, lean into the body, right? Like, how is this impacting your body? And in the same way, like your body is going to tell you what you need. Like, it's like this cyclical piece around being whole or knowing yourself or knowing your needs. And so I would love to know, I'm just so curious about how yoga kind of fits into this mom anxiety piece for you, and where, like, theoretically, how do you see it? And then like practically, what does that look like?
Yeah, I actually just had a session with my yoga mentor a little bit ago, and I was like crying, and I was totally in my hormones. And I'm like, this just feels impossible, like I feel like yoga worked so well when I was single and I, had time. And now I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I can't show up for this. And she was so wonderful. Her name's Karen. And, she said, like, maybe right now your practice is like, just 5 minutes journal. Like, my Dharma is now. So how do I live in the Dharma of like now? Like, so for me, that's been, how do I find kindness in the way that I'm living now? How can I be kind to myself in motherhood? Like, how can I show up for my life? And I don't know that for me, like, that is yoga. It's like moving into your life and then adapting and giving you a moment where you can connect with yourself in a real way. I mean, truly, that's yoga for me. It's, and I think there are tools to support that, but the essence of what it is really just allowing yourself a moment to be within so you can be in the relationship, so you can be out and be amongst people. So that is, absolutely, I think, how yoga kind of moves into like supporting this work. And on top of it, for me, it also goes very hand in hand with internal family systems in that piece too.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about internal family systems for people that don't know what that is?
Yeah, so internal family systems is a modality of supporting people through recognizing that the way we exist is almost like kind of called like a mosaic mind. And so that we don't just have one mind where this is all of who I am, but that we have a multiplicity of, and in internal family systems, it's called parts that exist within us. And, so for instance, I think the way that I relate it best to clients is like, even when you're speaking, right? You're like, well, a part of me like wants to go to sleep, but then a part of me like wants to stay up. So we kind of already have that recognition that sometimes we feel differently, and those two things actually can exist at the same time. And so, so kind of the idea is that we have different parts within us. And we have what is called the self, which is not a part. It is within all of us. We were born with it. I think actually yoga references this too. A lot of, I think, religion and spiritual aspects talk about that within a person there is a healing source. And in internal family systems, that's referred to as the self. And when parts of us can connect with the self, then parts can kind of feel free to exist as they need to. And so, for instance, parts that hold anxiety often move in the world through a place of fear. And when we can support and show compassion and healing towards those parts, often then they can be such a source of insight. I find that my parts that hold that anxiety, particularly my more mother parts, are so freaking intuitive. That's why I'm so passionate about this, because it's been my greatest source of knowledge when I've been able to free it and let it move as it. I think was always.
Give me an example of that.
Of that mothering part?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, So this is perfect. Okay. So my daughter is in kindergarten, and we just ended our spring break last week. And the week before, she got a sickness. And so she was out that full week. And then she was out for spring break. So she's been home for 2 weeks and went back on Monday. And then on top of it, my husband's been gone. So there's been a lot of changes. So Monday was rough. She woke up and she did not want to go to school. She's still not feeling 100% better. And she was just like not wanting to go to school. And so I think prior to my younger self with this part of me would have been very manager-like. So, she would have very much probably moved into a space of saying, things such as like really just kind of moving through like, you got to go to school. This is really important. We're not going to stay home, and just kind of moving her along to get her to school. And so I felt that in that moment, and I actually very much felt, for me, I have to often take space and kind of just check in with what's going on inside of me. And I felt this shift of just being more actually creative, which was different. Usually those moments I get so heightened that really blocks off any creativity. And so in that moment, I just started to sing to her to kind of get her body moving. So it was just like, let's get up, let's get moving, here we go. And then she kind of laughed at me like, Mom, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then she just kind of that laugh freed her up a little bit. And so, then we kind of brushed our teeth, and then it even moved me into more of compassion. Hey, I get it. You have been out of school and this is really tough. And I really appreciate you letting me know. You're letting me know that this is hard. So thank you for that. And so like that's not what I would have done before, right? Like so those are very different ways of interacting. And that to me, like that was so actually very intuitive to be with her. Like I didn't feel like this was forced. I didn't feel like I was trying to be this like ideal mom. That to me just felt intuitive and felt like really connecting with her in that moment.
Wow.
And it's not always like that. Like sometimes my manager parts very much take over and I just like, let's get moving.
Yes. And I think that's the pain point for most parents is that morning rush of like, we got to get out the door, guys. Like, let's go, let's do this. But I love that you kind of mentioned like connecting to your creative part as well, because I think for me, it is more of the manager of like, okay, we got to go. I can like get to the feelings first. I'm like, yeah, I know it's really tough and we got to go, like it's like, I'm a lot of fire. I'm all fire signs astrology. So I'm like, I don't really move fast, but my energy is very quick. So we joke a lot because my husband has the creativity part. He's like, oh, let's make a joke or let's make this a competition or let's like, he connects with himself more often and not in that way. And it's not to compare, but he can kind of like relate to them and get them kind of in that switch, like engaged with themselves. The tension is gone, right, from mom, like it kind of diffuses that. And it's like, oh, okay, we can now move freely. And I think that's where like mom anxiety, my anxiety kind of comes out more of like rage, but underneath it's a lot of anxiety of like, I feel out of control. And I think that's where it's hard for me to stop because it just feels like I'm just too out of control. So it's hard for me to like make a joke about it or to be creative because there's a task at hand. And which is so competing to my intuition. It's my head saying, girl, you got to go. We have to do this versus the gut intuition part that gets overridden, right? It's like override, we got to do this. And then it becomes more and more harder to come down and harder to connect with my kids personally in that way.
Totally. Absolutely. I really feel that too. And especially when there's that pressure, right? Like when I feel pressure, right? Like my husband was gone, so it was just me, like it was the first day back, like, I got multiple drop-offs, so I'm like, if I don't get you on time, then your brother's going to be late. And so that was like, it was so surprising to myself that I was able to like have enough space to go there when usually I am like those things, man, really get me to react, and they still do, right? Like it's not like I said, it's not like every moment is like that, and that's where repair becomes so powerful. But in that moment, that is where I feel like some of the more particularly internal feelings system has really created these shifts that are now showing up more embodied in my like day-to-day life. And it's really, it's nice to kind of appreciate those moments and also not hold on to it, right? Because then it's, I can also be hard on myself and say like, well, I always have to be this way, because sometimes there's still going to be moments where there's nothing connected inside of me, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think that's this whole point too of like, mom anxiety and what we're trying to do with how we get through also is like, this isn't a blueprint for the rest of your life. These are moments in time that feel really good and connected. And so we remember that, right? We remember that for the next time. But when it doesn't happen the next time, how do we come into that forgiveness or that empathy for ourselves, that supporting of ourselves, because it's so fucking hard. It is just so hard. And going back full circle to the beginning is like, we're not set up right to be really supported and not be in this like internal shame family system I just made that up. But you know, right? It's like, oh, well, this part of me is really bad, right? And so or I can never do this. And we kind of get stuck in those shameful pieces. And so it's not to, when you have something like that, it's just that that's possible, right? How good did that feel? And how do we get ourselves more to that moment because we feel the most aligned? Do we have a good outcome with our children? Yeah. But also we felt really good about that.
Right. And and authentically, because like in a moment of realness, right? Like I tend to be very perfectionist. Like that is a huge part of me. And so that's why I grab onto these moments and then I expect that. I expect myself to show up that way. And then there's a failure, right? If I can't quite, if I'm not, if that doesn't exist or doesn't happen and the way it happened before, then it's like, oh my gosh, I failed. And then I forget that it's existed before. And so you're totally right. Like there is this beauty of, which I think is like authentic appreciation, is that I can be like, it's almost to me like it feels like a blessing. Like, okay, like that moment was beautiful and was a moment of presence. That's really what it felt like. Like I was fully there. I was fully available. And, thank you. Like to me, it was like, okay, I was able to thank not just myself, but like the universe for allowing that.
Yeah.
And then there's like this permission that like you can't hold on to it either, right? That it's like, well, it is, and there's beauty in that, and doesn't mean like I'm a failure when it doesn't always show up.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I just feel like parenting is the therapy you've never asked for, right? It is that mirror that is just there every day, 24/7. And I know for me, it's been like, oh, girl, you need to work on this. Like, we think a lot about our kids and the behavior and the outcome we want from them, or the behavior we're trying to manage or not have them explode or whatever. And it still is just like, but what is in within me that feels anxious about that? What is it within me that feels ragey about that? And so there ain't no, there's nothing like having a child to really, force you to look at these parts of yourself, whether you do that work or not, like it's fine. But I found that it's been triggering and also this catalyst for growth for me in a way I've never experienced before.
Right. So spot on. Yeah. It reminds me of like, I think some of the work that I'm so interested in has been like, just like transitional phases, particularly in someone who's in a female body, in that like, like puberty, like there's more probably information out there for women about puberty and hormones and, adolescence and what you might experience during that phase. And I was, reading, recently, I think the book is like Maiden to Mother, where it talks about like the phase of, being a maiden, which I think is, for many, like your 20s of like feeling free and, exploring who you are and what you want in life, right? It's very much, it's like just exploratory and experimenting and how that can be such a growth of development. And then I think with motherhood, it's so different than that, like learning to be a mother, whether you are birthing babies or birthing, you choose to not have kids and birthing other things. It is this like moving more into like inward, internal. And so like I've really found that it can be such a place of like developmental growth if you're open to it, and some struggle, right? Some are like mad that they've lost their freedom and then, they still want to be back as a, in a sense, like a maiden. But if you're open to it, gosh, totally. It can be such a developmental growth time of like internal exploring.
Yeah, that, like I think with every birth, like a piece or a part of you dies and something gets reborn. And there is a lot of grief around that. There's a lot of like, that's the whole postpartum to a year to 2 years experience is like, where did I go and who am I now and where am I going to go or who I want to be? And so it is this constant reworking of ourselves, but it also just feels good because I think in my experience, I get more and more aligned with me. And then that, again, that like intuition or the who I really am versus all these things that I have shamed myself around or the things that I am upset about and like who else is really in there and what is she trying to say here, and obviously reparenting myself in that way. And it just becomes like a double layer of like I'm trying to parent this child and then I'm trying to reparent myself, and it can be a lot sometimes, but it also is, there's no other way. Like that's what it feels like. We're in it, so you can either keep going or, like there's times where we get stuck, but we're just on this journey to learning to mother ourselves and kind of shepherd this new beginning or this new birth of who we are.
Right, absolutely. And and doing it in a way that also feels right for you. Like I love how you said that, like even speaking for myself, I haven't had the best relationship with my mom. And so, almost like, when I kind of took on this role, that was a part of what I felt really lost in is like, I don't have a lot of guidance and I don't, any decision felt so big. And so, it's not that it's like me as a sole person who's figured it out. It's like I've learned how to find support and how to pull in that support in a way so I don't feel so alone in, some of those decisions. And it's been, just this beautiful dance of like learning how to trust me and my intuition and also then learning like when do I freaking need help? When
to
do
trust
I like
others?
Yes. And know that they are there.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, so good. Leslie, it's always so great to be with you, to be in the presence of you. I love connecting with you and chatting with you. So thank you so much for coming on. We're going to wrap up here. And if you guys want to stay tuned for part 2, Leslie's going to give us some quick tips on mom anxiety and how we can really move through it. So thanks so much, Leslie. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our show. We hope that we normalized your own anxiety in a world that tells moms to take care of their mental health without the support to do so. Stay tuned for next week's episode as Leslie unpacks ways we can befriend our anxiety and allow it to become useful instead of stressful. And if you want to see how this applies to your own life, check out Leslie's course, Mom Anxiety, on the How We Get Through app, which is available for both Android and iPhone. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.